I never planned on becoming a legend. Hell, I never planned on much of anything, except keeping my ship flying and my belly full. Name's Colt Brennan, and I've been hauling cargo across the fringe territories for the better part of 12 years now. The kind of work that keeps you anonymous, keeps you moving, keeps you from putting down roots that might strangle you later. The day everything changed started like any other worthless morning in the Ashara Belt. I docked my ship, the Dusty Rose, at a trading post that clung to an asteroid like a tick on a hound dog. The place smelled of recycled air, burned synth coffee, and the particular brand of desperation that comes from living too far from anywhere that matters. I was 3 drinks into forgetting why I'd taken a job from the Mendoza Syndicate when she walked in. And when I say walked, I mean she moved like water finding its level, all fluid grace and barely contained power. She was Kashari, one of the feline species from the twin sun systems, and she was the most striking creature I'd ever laid eyes on. Her fur was the color of winter moonlight, silver white, with patterns of charcoal grey that seemed to shift when she moved. But it was her tail that caught my attention first, that magnificent appendage that curved behind her like a question mark. Its tip, flicking with what I'd later learn, was barely contained anxiety. The Kashari considered their tails sacred, extensions of their very souls, and touching one without permission was about the worst insult you could offer. She sat at the bar, 3 stools down from me, and ordered something in her native language that the bartender somehow understood. Her ears, those delicate triangular things that sat atop her head, swiveled constantly, tracking every sound in that crowded room. When her eyes found mine, I felt something shift in my chest. They were amber, flecked with gold, and they held the kind of intelligence that made a man reconsider every stupid thing he'd ever done. I should have looked away, should have finished my drink and headed back to my ship. But I've never been particularly good at should. Instead, I raised my glass slightly in her direction. She held my gaze for 3 heartbeats, then deliberately turned away. The dismissal was clear as crystal water, but something in the tension of her shoulders told me she was aware of every breath I took. The bartender, a grizzled Terran who'd probably seen everything twice, leaned across the counter toward me. His voice was low, meant only for my ears. "You don't want to get mixed up with that one, Colt. She's being hunted." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, letting the burn ground me. Hunted by who? The Varani's cartel, maybe the Syndicate too. Word is she stole something that doesn't belong to her. He wiped down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Something worth killing for. Everything's worth killing for out here, I replied. What makes her special? The bartender glanced at her, then back at me. She's navigator class, the rare kind that can plot slip jumps without computer assistance, feel the gravity wells and magnetic currents like they're reading sheet music. Only about 1 in every million Kashari are born with the gift. That explained the graceful confidence, the way she held herself like someone who'd seen the universe from angles most folks couldn't imagine. Navigator-class Kashari were worth their weight in processed platinum. They were also notoriously independent, which probably explained why someone wanted her badly enough to send hunters. I was about to turn back to my drink when 3 figures entered the bar. They moved with the kind of synchronized purpose that screamed military training or worse. Their eyes scanned the room in overlapping patterns, professional and thorough. When their gaze landed on the Kashari woman, I saw her entire body tense. She didn't run. Instead, she straightened her spine, placed both hands flat on the bar, and waited. The tail that had been flicking with anxiety went absolutely still, which any idiot who'd spent time around Kashari knew meant she was preparing for violence. The lead hunter was Vortan, his blue-grey skin marked with the scars that came from a lifetime of dirty work. He approached her slowly, hands visible but ready. "Lysandra Venn," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet bar, "the Varani's cartel requests your immediate return. The item you liberated from their vault was not yours to take, so that was her name. Lysandra. It fit her, somehow elegant and dangerous at once. She turned on her stool, facing him fully. Her voice when she spoke was like smoke and honey, accented but clear. The Varanis cartel stole that item from my family 3 generations ago. I was simply reclaiming what was already mine. Semantics don't interest me, the Vortan replied. You have 2 options. Come quietly, or come bleeding. Either way, you're coming. I should have stayed out of it, should have kept my head down and my nose in my drink. But there's a particular kind of injustice that sits wrong in my gut. And watching 3 armed hunters corner 1 woman, navigator class or not, triggered every contrary impulse I'd been born with. I stood up, slow and deliberate, making sure they saw me moving. The whiskey glass stayed in my right hand, but my left drifted toward the plasma pistol holstered at my hip. Seems like the lady isn't interested in your offer, friend. Might be time to reassess your options. The Vortan's eyes flicked to me, calculating. This doesn't concern you, human. I'd advise you to sit back down and finish your drink. I tilted my head slightly, letting a smile that wasn't friendly at all cross my face. See, that's where you're wrong. I'm in this bar, enjoying what passes for peace, and you're disturbing that peace. Makes it my concern. Lysandra's ears had rotated toward me, and I could feel her attention like a physical weight. She hadn't asked for help, might even resent the implication that she needed it, but I'd already committed to this particular brand of stupidity. The Vortan's hand moved toward his weapon. I was faster. The plasma pistol cleared leather and leveled at his center mass before he'd gotten his fingers around his gun grip. My voice stayed calm, conversational even. Now, I'm not what you'd call a violent man by nature, but I am practical, and practically speaking, if any one of you 3 moves wrong, I'm going to paint this bar with your insides. That would be unfortunate for everyone, especially the bartender who'd have to clean it up. Colt, the bartender muttered behind me. Think about this. I am thinking, I assured him. I'm thinking these folks are outstaying their welcome. The Vortan studied me for a long moment. His 2 companions had spread out slightly, trying to flank, but I'd positioned myself where I could track all 3. Finally, he spoke. The Varanis cartel has a long memory, human. Whatever she's paying you isn't worth making enemies of them. Good thing she's not paying me anything, then, I replied. Makes this a purely philosophical exercise. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. This isn't over, Lysandra. The cartel always collects its debts. Looking forward to it, she said, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of her body. The 3 hunters backed toward the exit, keeping their eyes on us until they'd cleared the doorway. The moment they were gone, the bar erupted in conversation, everyone suddenly having an opinion about what had just happened. I holstered my pistol and turned to Lysandra. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, those amber eyes searching my face for something. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, she said finally. I've been told I'm a healthy mix of both, I replied, settling back onto my stool. Can I buy you a drink? Seems like you could use one. She studied me for another moment, then moved to the stool beside mine. Her tail curled carefully around herself, never touching me, but close enough that I could see the individual hairs along its length. Why did you do that? I shrugged. Didn't seem right. 3 on 1. You don't even know what I stole. What if I deserved their attention? Then I guess I've made a mistake, I said. Won't be my first, probably won't be my last. But watching someone get dragged off by cartel enforcers while I sit by and do nothing, that would sit worse than any mistake. The bartender placed a drink in front of her without being asked. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. I'm going to bring you considerable trouble, Colt Brennan. The fact that she knew my name should have worried me. Instead, I found myself grinning. Trouble and I are old friends. We have an understanding. Do you have a ship? The Dusty Rose. She's not much to look at, but she's fast and she's mine. Lysandra set down her glass with deliberate care. I need passage to the outer reach, specifically to the sanctum of falling stars. It's a journey of approximately 18 days through some of the most dangerous space in the fringe. I can pay you 50,000 credits upon arrival. 50,000 credits was enough to repair every system on my ship twice over and still have enough left for a comfortable retirement on one of the core worlds. It was also the kind of money that confirmed exactly how much trouble she represented. What's at the sanctum? Something that belongs to me, she said. Something the cartel wants very badly. And the item you already stole? A map, she replied, showing the way to the sanctum. My family hid something there generations ago before we were scattered. The cartel learned of it and has been searching for years. I simply beat them to the final clue. I should have said no, should have finished my drink, wished her luck, and walked away from the most beautiful and dangerous proposition I'd ever encountered. Instead, I heard myself saying, "The Dusty Rose leaves in 2 hours. Be on board or be left behind." The smile she gave me then could have stopped my heart. It was genuine, warm, and tinged with something like relief. "Thank you, Colt Brennan. I will not forget this kindness. Just remember it when you're writing that credit transfer," I said, trying to keep things light. We left the bar separately, her slipping out through a side exit, while I made a show of settling my tab and complaining about the quality of the whiskey. By the time I made it back to my ship, she was already there, waiting in the shadows of the docking bay. She carried a single pack, small enough that I wondered if it held everything she owned in the universe. The Dusty Rose wasn't anything special to look at. She was a modified cargo hauler with extra shielding I'd installed myself and engines that had been rebuilt so many times they were more scar tissue than original parts. But she was home, and she'd never let me down when it mattered. I keyed open the airlock and gestured for Lysandra to precede me. She stepped aboard with the cautious grace of someone accustomed to evaluating escape routes. Her nose twitched, taking in the scents of machine oil, recycled air, and the faint ghost of the lavender incense I sometimes burned to cover the smell of burnt wiring. "It's not fancy," I admitted, sealing the airlock behind us, "but the life support's solid, and the gravity generator only cuts out on Tuesdays." She turned to face me in the narrow corridor, and I was suddenly very aware of how small the space was, how close she stood. "It's more than I had this morning," she said quietly. "That makes it a palace." I showed her to the passenger cabin, which was really just a storage room I'd cleared out and added a bunk to years ago when I'd briefly considered taking on crew. She set her pack on the bed and ran her fingers along the wall, feeling the vibration of the ship's systems. "You've modified the engine configuration," she observed. "These harmonics are unusual. You can hear that?" I asked, impressed despite myself. "I can feel it," she corrected. "The slip drive is older than the hull, but someone has tuned it with great care. The resonance patterns are almost musical." "That would be me," I admitted. "Spent 3 months at a salvage station on the edge of the broken ring, getting her to sing just right." She turned to me, and there was something in her expression that looked like recognition. "You're a craftsman," she said. "Not just a pilot, but someone who understands the soul of machinery." I shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I'd just like things to work properly." Lysandra smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "I think we're going to get along, Colt Brennan." I left her to settle in and made my way to the bridge. The familiar routine of pre-flight checks grounded me, gave my hands something to do while my mind processed the reality of what I'd just agreed to. 18 days in close quarters with a woman who made my pulse race while being hunted by one of the most ruthless criminal organizations in the fringe. Just another day in paradise. The undocking procedure went smoothly, and within 30 minutes we were clear of the asteroid field and preparing for the first slip jump. I was plotting coordinates when Lysandra appeared in the doorway of the bridge. She'd changed into something more comfortable, a simple jumpsuit that somehow managed to accentuate every curve while remaining entirely practical. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the navigator's station. "Be my guest," I said. Fair warning, the interface is about 10 years out of date. She settled into the seat with a grace that suggested she'd been born to it. Her fingers danced across the controls, and I watched in fascination as she closed her eyes and simply felt her way through the navigational data. "This is beautiful," she murmured. "Your ship, she sings the right songs." I'd never heard anyone describe navigational data as beautiful before, but watching her work, I began to understand what she meant. There was an artistry to the way she moved through the information, finding patterns and harmonies that my computer only approximated. "We can shave 3 days off your journey," she said, opening her eyes, "if you trust me to guide us through the serpent's teeth instead of going around." The serpent's teeth were a dense cluster of magnetic anomalies that played hell with standard navigation systems. Ships that tried to navigate through them without exceptional skill usually ended up torn apart by gravity shears or lost in slip space forever. "You can navigate the teeth?" She met my eyes, and there was absolute confidence in her gaze. "I was born navigating the teeth, Colt. My family's territory bordered them for generations. I know every current, every well, every hidden path. Trust me." And here was the moment of decision. Trust a woman I'd known for less than 3 hours with both our lives, or take the safe route and add 3 days to a journey that was already dangerous enough. "All right," I said. "Show me what navigator class really means." The smile she gave me was worth every risk. "Plot your course, Captain Brennan. Let me show you how the stars truly dance." The next 2 hours were among the most exhilarating of my life. Lysandra guided us into the teeth with a confidence that bordered on reckless, but every maneuver she called was perfect. We threaded through gravity wells that should have crushed us, rode magnetic currents that accelerated us beyond what my engines could achieve alone, and emerged on the far side having saved not 3 days, but 4. When we finally broke free into clear space, I was breathing hard, my knuckles white on the controls. Lysandra sat back in her chair, looking utterly at peace. "You see," she said softly, "the universe has its own music. You just have to learn to listen." I stared at her, this impossible woman who'd just rewritten my understanding of what was possible. "That was incredible," I managed. She turned to me, and for the first time since we'd met, her guard seemed to lower slightly. "Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for being trustworthy," I replied. We fell into a routine over the next few days. I'd handle the mechanical aspects of flying, she'd refine our navigation, and in the evenings we'd share meals in the galley. She was surprisingly easy to talk to, once you got past the formal reserve that seemed natural to her species. She told me about growing up on Kesha Prime, about the vast forests that covered her home continent, and the way the twin suns painted everything in shades of amber and gold. In return, I told her about Earth, about the ranch in Montana where I'd grown up before the wanderlust had taken me to the stars, about my father who'd taught me everything about engines, and my mother who'd taught me that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds were terrible. We were 5 days into the journey when I noticed her doing something strange. We'd just finished dinner, and she was sitting in the common area, her tail held in both hands, examining it with a look of concern that made my chest tighten. "Everything all right?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. She looked up startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. "It's nothing," she said quickly, but her tail twitched in a way that I'd learned meant she was lying. I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle. "Lysandra, we're in this together now. If something's wrong, I'd like to help if I can." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers still moving through the fur of her tail. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, "It's damaged. From before I met you, when I was escaping from the cartel's vault. One of their security measures involved an energy field. It burned the nerves along the lower third." "Can I see?" I asked, then immediately realized how forward that sounded. "I mean, if you're comfortable. I know it's personal." Her ears flattened slightly, a sign of discomfort, but she didn't pull away. "No one has ever touched my tail," she said quietly. "Among my people, it's permitted only for family and bonded mates. The intimacy is considered greater than any other physical contact." I started to pull back, but she stopped me with a look. "However," she continued, "you've risked your life for mine. You've shown me kindness when you owed me nothing. If anyone has earned the right, it's you." She extended her tail toward me, and I could see the tremor in the movement, the vulnerability of the gesture. I took it carefully in both hands, feeling the warmth of her through the soft fur. The lower section she'd indicated showed subtle signs of damage, the fur slightly singed, the skin beneath probably tender. "I have a medical kit," I said. "Not military grade, but it has regeneration gel that might help. If you'll let me try." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and I went to fetch the kit. When I returned, she'd positioned herself on the couch in a way that gave me better access. I settled beside her, aware of every breath we both took, and began the careful process of applying the gel. Her tail was softer than I'd imagined, the fur like silk under my fingers. I worked slowly, carefully, trying to be as gentle as possible. The gel would help stimulate nerve regeneration, but it was the contact that seemed to affect her more. Her breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more controlled. Her eyes were closed, and if I didn't know better, I'd say she was purring, though the sound was so quiet I might have been imagining it. "Does this hurt?" I asked, pausing. "No," she whispered. "It's the opposite of hurt." I continued working, moving up from the damaged section to ensure even application. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on me. This was trust of a kind I'd rarely been given, and I was determined to be worthy of it. When I finished, I carefully set her tail back in her lap and moved to stand. Her hand shot out, catching my wrist with surprising speed. "Thank you," she said, opening her eyes to look at me. "That was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in longer than I can remember." "It was nothing," I said, suddenly awkward. "It was everything," she corrected. She released my wrist but didn't look away. On Keshar Prime, when someone tends to your tail with such care, it's considered a declaration of intent. "Intent to do what?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "Intent to court," she said simply, "to express interest in bonding." My heart was doing complicated things in my chest. And what if that someone is from a different species entirely? What if they're just a cargo hauler who got lucky? She smiled, and it was the warmest expression I'd seen from her yet. Then I would say that species matters far less than character. And luck has nothing to do with the choices we make every day to be kind, to be brave, to be true. I sat back down, closer this time. "Lysandra, I'm not good at subtle. Never have been. So I'm just going to say it straight. These past 5 days with you have been the best I've had in years. You're brilliant and brave and beautiful, and every time you smile at me I forget how to breathe properly. But I also know you've got a mission, and I'm just the pilot getting you there. So if I'm reading this wrong, tell me now and I'll back off. No harm, no foul." She reached out and placed her hand over mine. "You're not reading it wrong," she said. "But Colt, you need to understand what you're getting into. My family's legacy, the thing I'm seeking at the Sanctum, it comes with complications. The cartel wants it, but they're not the only ones. And once we retrieve it, my life becomes exponentially more dangerous." "Good thing I like dangerous," I said. Her laugh was like music. "You say that now. Wait until you've met my relatives." "You have relatives?" I asked, surprised. "I thought you said your family was scattered." "Scattered doesn't mean gone," she explained. "There are 17 of us left, spread across the fringe. If I can reach the Sanctum, if I can claim what's there, I can finally bring them together again. Give them back what was stolen from us." "What was stolen?" "Our home," she said simply. "The cartel didn't just take the map. They took our ancestral lands, forced us into diaspora, made us refugees in our own sector. What's in the sanctum is proof of our original claim, documentation that predates the cartel's charter by 3 generations. With it, we can challenge them legally, force arbitration through the Concordat. That's a tall order, I observed. The Concordat doesn't usually side with individuals against established powers. They will if the law is clear, she said. The Concordat is many things, but they respect precedent, and our claim has precedent in volumes. So this isn't about treasure, I realized. It's about justice. Justice and home, she confirmed. Everything else I can live without. But home, family, belonging, those are worth any risk. I understood that more than she knew. I'd left Earth looking for adventure, but I'd never stopped missing the feeling of belonging somewhere. Then count me in, I said. Whatever happens at the sanctum and after, you've got my ship and my gun. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against mine. A gesture I'd learned was one of deep affection among her people. I believe I am falling in love with you, Colt Brennan. I thought you should know. My throat was tight with emotion I didn't quite know how to express. I believe I fell the moment you walked into that bar, Lysandra Venn. I've just been catching up ever since. We stayed like that for a while, forehead to forehead, breathing the same air, neither willing to break the contact. Outside, the stars streamed past in ribbons of light as we hurtled toward our destination. Inside, something new and fragile and impossibly strong was being born. The attack came on the 9th day, just as we were preparing to make the final jump to the sanctum sector. Proximity alarms screamed through the ship, and I lunged for the controls as weapons fire lit up the darkness around us. 3 ships, Lysandra called from her station, her voice steady despite the danger. Cartel interceptors, heavily armed. They must have been waiting along the most likely approach vector. I threw the Dusty Rose into evasive maneuvers, and she responded like the beauty she was, dancing through the incoming fire with grace that shouldn't have been possible for a ship her size. But we were outnumbered and outgunned, and we both knew it. "Can we make the jump?" I shouted over the sound of impacts against our shields. "Not without coordinates," Lysandra replied, her fingers flying over her console. "And I need 30 seconds of stable flight to plot them. 30 seconds might as well have been 30 years. Our shields were already at 60% and dropping fast. I armed our defensive weapons, such as they were, and returned fire. One of the interceptors broke off, trailing atmosphere, but the other 2 pressed their advantage. 20 seconds, Lysandra called. The ship bucked as a direct hit hammered our port shield. Warning lights cascaded across my console, and I could hear the Dusty Rose screaming in protest. I redirected power from life support to shields, buying us maybe another 10 seconds if we were lucky. 10 seconds, Lysandra said, and I could hear the strain in her voice. The second interceptor lined up for a killing shot. I could see it powering weapons, the telltale glow that meant they were charging something big enough to crack us open. Time seemed to slow, every detail crystallizing with perfect clarity. This was it. We were going to die here, so close to our goal it was almost funny. Then Lysandra's voice cut through the chaos, clear as a bell. Jump coordinates locked. Engaging slip drive in 3, 2, 1, now. I slammed the activation sequence, and reality twisted. The interceptors, the weapons fire, the cold emptiness of space, all of it folded away into something else, some other dimension where normal physics took a holiday. The slip drive's hum became a roar, and the Dusty Rose shuddered like a living thing being born. When we emerged, the silence was deafening. I checked our position and felt my breath catch. We were exactly where we needed to be, hanging in space above a moon that I knew from Lysandra's descriptions had to be the sanctum of falling stars. Shields at 12%, I reported, running diagnostics. Hull integrity holding. But we've got damage to the port thruster assembly. We're not making another jump without repairs. We won't need to, Lysandra said, and there was wonder in her voice. Look. I looked. The moon below us was small, barely worth the designation, but it was covered in structures that gleamed in the light of the nearby star. Ancient architecture that seemed to grow from the rock itself, all graceful spires and flowing curves that spoke of a civilization far older than the cartel, older than the Concordat, maybe older than human spaceflight. "My ancestors built this," Lysandra whispered. "Before we were scattered, before we forgot who we were, we built this. And they left something for us, trusting that one day we'd return." I reached over and took her hand. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The descent was tricky with our damaged thrusters, but I'd landed in worse conditions. We touched down in what looked like a designated landing area, the surface smooth and marked with symbols I didn't recognize, but Lysandra clearly did. She was already unbuckling, her movements quick with anticipation. "Wait," I said, catching her arm. "We need to be smart about this. The cartel knows where we're headed. They'll be regrouping, calling in reinforcements. We don't have much time." She nodded, forcing herself to slow down. "You're right." Quickly then, but carefully. We geared up with what weapons we had and made our way to the airlock. The atmosphere outside was thin but breathable, the gravity about 80% standard. Lysandra stood for a moment on the landing pad, her eyes closed, her tail extended behind her in a gesture of profound emotion. "I can feel them," she said quietly. "Generations of my family. Their presence is woven into these stones." I gave her a moment, understanding that this was about more than just retrieving documents. This was homecoming, reclamation, the fulfilling of a promise made long before either of us was born. The entrance to the main structure was sealed, but Lysandra approached it with confidence. She placed her hand on a panel beside the door, and I watched in amazement as it began to glow, recognizing her genetic signature across the centuries. The door opened with a whisper of ancient mechanisms, revealing a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. We walked in silence, our footsteps echoing in the vast space. The walls were covered in murals depicting Kashari history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the eternal dance of creation and destruction. Lysandra paused occasionally to touch a particular image, her fingers tracing lines that clearly meant something to her. The central chamber was breathtaking. It was a perfect sphere, the walls covered in what looked like stars, but were actually data storage units, millions of them, each containing a piece of her people's heritage. In the center of the sphere, suspended by technology I couldn't begin to understand, was a crystal the size of my fist, pulsing with inner light. "The legacy archive," Lysandra breathed. "Everything we were, everything we knew, preserved here for the day when we'd be strong enough to return." She approached the crystal carefully, reverently. When her fingers touched it, the entire chamber lit up, and suddenly the walls were alive with information, cascading data that spoke of land rights and genetic lineages and historical precedents that painted an unambiguous picture. The cartel's claim to Kashari territory was built on lies and forged documents. Lysandra's family had been the rightful stewards for over 2,000 years. "This is it," I said, stunned by the scope of what we were seeing. "This is everything you need." "Not quite everything," a new voice said, and we both spun to find we were no longer alone. The man standing in the doorway was Kashari, his fur the same silver-white as Lysandra's, but marked with age and scarring. He was flanked by 4 others, all armed, all watching us with the kind of focus that suggested they were very good at violence. "Uncle Theron," Lysandra said, and I heard the betrayal in her voice. "How did you find us?" "I've known about the sanctum for years, child," Theron replied, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. "Your mother told me before she died, made me promise to protect it until you were ready. But you were never going to be ready, were you? Never going to be strong enough to do what needs to be done." I stepped slightly in front of Lysandra, my hand on my pistol. "And what needs to be done?" "The cartel can't be beaten through law," Theron said. "The Concordat is corrupt, bought and paid for. The only way to reclaim what's ours is through force, through blood, through becoming exactly what they are." "No," Lysandra said firmly. That's not what our ancestors wanted. They built this place as a sanctuary for knowledge, for truth, not as a weapon. Truth without power is just words, Theron countered. I've spent 20 years gathering support, building an army, waiting for the moment when we could strike back. The Legacy Archive doesn't just prove our land rights. It contains military technology, weapons designs from when our people were conquerors, not refugees. With it, we can destroy the cartel, take everything they have, become the power in this sector. And become them in the process, I said, trading one tyranny for another. Theron's eyes fixed on me, cold and calculating. The human has no say in this. This is Keshari business. He's with me, Lysandra said, moving to stand beside me. That makes it his business too. Then you choose poorly, Theron said. Give me the archive, Lysandra. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I must. This is bigger than any individual, bigger than your romantic notions of justice. I've made my choice, Uncle, Lysandra replied. The archive stays sealed. We'll present it to the Concordat as our ancestors intended, and we'll let law and truth decide the outcome. Then you're a fool, he said, and gestured to his companions. What happened next was chaos. I drew my pistol and fired, driving Theron's people into cover. Lysandra sprinted for the control panel, her fingers flying as she initiated some kind of lockdown sequence. Energy barriers sprang up throughout the chamber, cutting off access to the crystal. Theron roared in frustration and returned fire. I felt something burn across my shoulder, the pain white-hot but distant, adrenaline keeping me moving. I laid down covering fire while Lysandra completed whatever she was doing. The archive is sealed, she shouted, keyed to my genetic signature and his. She pointed at me. It won't open for anyone else, not even you, Uncle. You can't keep it from me forever, Theron snarled. I'll take you both, force you to open it. You could try, a new voice said from the chamber's other entrance, or you could surrender and save everyone the trouble. I risked a glance and felt hope surge. Captain Meridian Chen of the Concordat Peace Fleet stood there with a full tactical squad, weapons trained on Theron's position. She was a legend in the fringe, known for actually giving a damn about justice, even when it was inconvenient. Captain Chen, Lysandra said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the coordinates, Chen replied. Your message about the Sanctum's discovery reached us 3 days ago. We've been investigating the cartel's land claims ever since, and what we've found is damning enough even without this archive. Theron's people dropped their weapons, recognizing when they were beaten. Theron himself stood there, shoulders slumped, looking older than his years. I wanted to save our people, he said quietly. I know, Uncle, Lysandra replied, and there was compassion in her voice despite everything. But we can't save ourselves by becoming monsters. The next few hours were a blur of official statements and evidence gathering. Captain Chen's people documented everything, securing the archive and promising Lysandra that it would be presented to the full Concordat Council within the month. Theron and his followers were taken into custody, though Chen promised they'd be treated fairly, that their grievances would be heard, even if their methods were condemned. I got my shoulder patched up by one of Chen's medics, a gruff Terran, who told me I was lucky the shot had been a glancing blow. Lysandra stayed by my side the entire time, her hand in mine, her tail wrapped gently around my wrist, in what I'd learned was a gesture of deep affection. When the officials finally left us alone, we stood in the central chamber of the sanctum, surrounded by the legacy of her ancestors. The crystal pulsed softly, now keyed to both our genetic signatures, a trust Lysandra had given me that I still wasn't sure I deserved. What happens now? I asked, breaking the comfortable silence. She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw the future taking shape. Now we rebuild, she said. The Concordat will rule in our favor, I'm certain of it. The evidence is too clear. My family will be able to return home, reclaim our lands, start again. That's good, I said. That's what you wanted. Part of what I wanted, she corrected, stepping closer. The other part is standing right here, bleeding on my ancestor's floor because he was fool enough to fight for a stranger. I wasn't a stranger by then, I pointed out. I was, at least, an acquaintance. Her laugh echoed in the vast space. Colt Brennan, you are the most stubborn, brave, ridiculous man I've ever met. And I find I cannot imagine my future without you in it. My heart was doing that complicated thing again. Lysandra, I'm a cargo hauler. I don't have land or status or anything to offer except a ship that's held together with hope and spare parts. You have yourself, she said simply. Your kindness, your courage, your gentle hands that healed my tale when no one else could touch it. That's worth more than all the land in the sector. I pulled her close, mindful of her tale, and kissed her properly for the first time. She melted into me, her purr vibrating through both our bodies, and for a moment the universe contracted to just the two of us, two unlikely souls who'd found each other against all odds. When we finally broke apart, she was smiling. In Kashari culture, she said, when someone tends to your tale and you accept them, when they fight beside you and you survive together, when you seal a legacy with their name alongside yours, it's considered a bonding. A bonding as in marriage? I asked, wanting to be clear. As in forever, she confirmed, if you'll have me. I thought about my life before I'd met her, the endless wandering, the jobs that meant nothing, the loneliness I'd convinced myself was freedom. Then I thought about the past 9 days, about learning to read her moods by the angle of her ears, about the way she hummed when she was plotting navigation, about the future we could build together. I'd be honored, I said. Though fair warning, I've never been married before. I might be terrible at it. Then we'll learn together, she replied, just like we learned to sing the same song while flying through the serpent's teeth. We spent 3 more days at the sanctum, while the Dusty Rose underwent repairs courtesy of the Concordat. Captain Chen had taken a personal interest in our case, probably because it gave her ammunition against the cartel's corruption. She assured us that Lysandra's family would be contacted, that the wheels of justice were already turning. On the 4th day, we received word that the first of Lysandra's relatives had begun arriving at Kesha Prime. The Concordat had issued a preliminary ruling, granting them temporary settlement rights pending the full hearing. It wasn't everything, not yet, but it was a beginning. We need to go, Lysandra said, reading the message. My sister Kira is there, and my cousin Davin. They'll want to meet you. Meet me? I asked, suddenly nervous. Why would they want to meet me? Because you're bonded to me, she said, as if it were obvious. Because without you, none of this would have happened. You're family now, Colt. Family. The word settled into my chest, like a missing piece clicking into place. I'd been alone for so long I'd forgotten what that felt like. The journey back to Kesha Prime took 11 days, even with Lysandra's expert navigation. We used the time to plan, to dream, to figure out what our life together might look like. She wanted to establish a navigation school, teach the next generation of Keshari how to read the stars the way her family had for generations. I found myself thinking about settling down, maybe opening a repair shop, using my skills to help others keep their ships flying. But we'd still keep the Dusty Rose, we agreed. Still take the occasional job when Wanderlust called. Some things were too much a part of who we were to give up entirely. Kesha Prime was more beautiful than I'd imagined from Lysandra's descriptions. The twin suns painted everything in amber and gold, just like she'd said, and the forests that covered the northern continent were so vast they were visible from orbit. We landed at the settlement that had been established for returning family members, a growing community of temporary structures that buzzed with activity and hope. Lysandra's sister Kira was waiting at the landing pad, and the reunion between them made my throat tight. They embraced with a fierceness that spoke of years apart, of pain shared across the distance, of joy at finally being together again. Kira's fur was darker than Lysandra's, almost charcoal, but they had the same amber eyes, the same graceful movements. When Kira finally released her sister, she turned to me with an evaluating gaze that reminded me of facing down cartel enforcers. "So you're the human who stole my sister's heart." "I didn't steal anything," I replied. "She gave it freely." Kira's stern expression cracked into a grin. "Good answer." She stepped forward and embraced me, her strength surprising. "Welcome to the family, Colt Brennan. I hope you're prepared for chaos. We Vens are not known for our peaceful nature." "I'm starting to figure that out," I said, laughing. Over the next few weeks, more family members arrived. 17 in total, just like Lysandra had said, each with their own story of survival and exile. There was old Marcan, who'd been a child when the family was scattered and now ran a successful trading business in the outer colonies. Young Sarah, barely more than a kit, who'd never known Kesha Prime but felt its pull in her blood. Tavin and Rel, twin brothers who'd served in the Concordat fleet and brought military precision to the settlement's organization. They welcomed me not as an outsider, but as one of their own, the human who'd helped bring them home. It was overwhelming and humbling, and more than I'd ever expected. The Concordat hearing took place 6 weeks after we'd arrived on Kesha Prime. It was held in the capital city, a gleaming metropolis that spoke of the Keshari's long history and resilient culture. Lysandra presented the evidence from the Legacy Archive with a clarity and passion that left no room for doubt. The cartel's lawyers tried to argue, to obfuscate, to delay, but the truth was too clear. The ruling came down 3 days later. The cartel's land claims were declared invalid. The Ven family's ancestral rights were fully restored. Reparations would be paid for generations of illegal occupation. It was everything Lysandra had fought for and more. That night, the entire settlement celebrated. There was music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. I found myself swept up in it all, learning traditional Keshari dances that I was absolutely terrible at, but that everyone seemed to find hilarious. Lysandra laughed until she cried, her tail swishing with pure joy, and I thought I'd never seen anything more beautiful. We were standing on the edge of the celebration, catching our breath, when she turned to me. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for being brave in that bar, for trusting me in the teeth, for standing with me at the sanctum, for being exactly who you are." I pulled her close, resting my chin on top of her head. "I should be thanking you," I replied. "A year ago, I was just drifting through space, with no purpose beyond the next job. You gave me a reason to be brave. You gave me a home. We gave each other home," she corrected. "That's how bonding works." In the months that followed, we built our life together. Lysandra established her navigation school in a beautiful building overlooking the forest. I opened my repair shop, and word spread quickly that the human who'd bonded with a Ven knew his way around an engine. We were busy, fulfilled, surrounded by family and friends, and the kind of community I'd never known I was missing. The Dusty Rose sat in our private hangar, maintained with loving care, but less frequently used. Still, every few months the wanderlust would hit us both, and we'd take a job, just the two of us, flying through the stars like we'd done in those early days. Those trips were sacred, reminders of how we'd started, adventures that kept us sharp and connected. One evening, about a year after we'd returned to Kesha Prime, I found Lysandra sitting on our porch, watching the twin suns set. Her tail was wrapped around her in that contemplative way I'd learned meant she was thinking deeply about something. "Everything all right?" I asked, settling beside her. She leaned into me, purring softly. "More than all right," she said. "I was just thinking about that day in the bar when you stood up for me. How different my life would be if you'd stayed out of it." "Different how?" "I'd probably be in a cartel prison," she said. "Or dead. Or worse, still running, still alone, still carrying the weight of my family's legacy with no hope of ever setting it down." "But you're not," I pointed out. "You're here, you're home, you're surrounded by people who love you." "Because of you," she said, turning to look at me. Because you saw someone who needed help and didn't hesitate. That's who you are, Colt Brennan. That's why I fell in love with you. I kissed her, tasting the sweetness of the moment, the perfect rightness of it all. When I pulled back, I said, "You know what the funny thing is? I always thought of myself as selfish, looking out for number one, avoiding complications. And then you walked into my life and proved you were wrong," she finished. "Proved you were capable of so much more than you believed." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the suns paint the sky in shades of fire and gold. In the distance I could hear the sounds of the settlement, children playing, adults calling to one another, the rhythmic sounds of construction as more buildings went up. The Venn family was growing, not just in number but in strength, in hope, in future. "I've been thinking," Lysandra said after a while, "about expanding the navigation school, offering scholarships to students from other species, humans especially. Your people have such potential for understanding the stars, they just need the right training." "I think that's a beautiful idea," I said. "The universe could use more bridges between species, more understanding." She smiled. "We could build those bridges together. Your repair shop could become a training center too, teach the practical mechanics of spaceflight. We could create something that outlasts us, a legacy of connection and knowledge." I liked the sound of that. Creating something that mattered, that would continue after we were gone. It was a different kind of adventure than I'd imagined for myself, but no less meaningful. A year after that conversation, the combined school opened. The Venn Brennan Institute for Interspecies Navigation and Engineering. It was a mouthful, but it was ours. Mine and Lysandra's dream made real. We had students from a dozen species, all learning to read the stars and understand the machines that carried them there. Gira ran the administrative side while we focused on teaching. It turned out I had a knack for explaining complex mechanical concepts in ways that made sense across cultural boundaries. Lysandra was a natural teacher, patient and encouraging, while demanding excellence from her students. We'd been running the institute for 3 years when Lysandra came to me with news that changed everything again. "I'm pregnant," she said, and her voice held wonder and fear in equal measure. I stared at her, my mind trying to process. "Pregnant? But I'm human, you're Kashari, I didn't think." "Life finds a way," she said, laughing through tears. "Captain Chen put me in touch with a xenobiologist. Apparently, we're not the first human Kashari pairing to conceive. It's rare, but not impossible. Our child will be something new, Colt, the first of their kind in this sector." I pulled her close, my own eyes damp. A child. Our child. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also more excited than I've ever been. We're creating something unprecedented, a bridge between our peoples made flesh." The pregnancy was complicated, requiring monitoring by specialists from both Earth and Keshar Prime. But Lysandra was strong, stronger than I'd ever given her credit for, and she carried our child with a grace that left me in awe. Our daughter was born on a quiet morning as the twin suns rose over the forest. She had my eyes, Lysandra's fur pattern, though softer and shorter, and a tail that already showed the strength and expressiveness of her mother's people. We named her Nova, for the stars that had brought us together, and Kira for the sister who'd welcomed me into the family. Holding her for the first time, feeling her tiny hand wrap around my finger, I understood what Lysandra had meant about legacy. This wasn't just our daughter. She was proof that different worlds could come together and create something beautiful, something that belonged to both and neither, something entirely her own. Nova grew up surrounded by love and learning, equally comfortable with human technology and Keshari tradition. She had her mother's gift for navigation and my stubborn insistence on understanding how things worked. By the time she was 5, she could plot basic slip jumps in her head and rebuild a thruster assembly with her eyes closed. But more than that, she was kind. She saw no difference between species, treating everyone with the same open-hearted acceptance. Watching her play with human and Kashari children alike, mediating their disputes with wisdom beyond her years, I saw the future Lysandra and I had dreamed of taking shape. The Dusty Rose made her final flight when Nova was 7. The old ship had been with me through so much, but time and hard use had finally caught up with her. Rather than letting her be scrapped, we gave her a place of honor at the Institute, transforming her into a hands-on learning environment where students could practice on real systems. Nova loved spending time in the Dusty Rose, climbing through the corridors I'd walked thousands of times, sitting in the pilot's seat and pretending to navigate impossible courses. I'd find her there sometimes, talking to the ship like it could hear her, telling it stories about the adventures her parents had shared. One evening, when Nova was 10, she asked me the question I'd been waiting for. "Dad," she said, her tail swishing with curiosity, "tell me again about the day you met Mom." So I told her. About the bar in the Ashara belt, about 3 hunters and a woman with a tail no one had ever touched. About choosing to stand up when I could have stayed down, about learning to trust someone I barely knew, about finding home in the last place I'd expected. She listened with rapt attention, her amber eyes wide. "And you weren't scared?" she asked when I finished. I was terrified, I admitted, but sometimes being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Sometimes you're both at the same time. "Is that what makes someone a hero?" she asked. "I don't know about hero," I said, "but I think it's what makes someone human, or Kashari, or anything worth being. The willingness to be scared and act anyway, to stand up when it's easier to sit down, to reach out when you don't know if you'll be accepted." Nova thought about that for a while, her young mind processing. "I want to be like that," she said finally, "brave enough to be scared." "You already are, kiddo," I assured her. "You're braver than you know." Lysandra found us there, curled up together on the old couch in the Dusty Rose's common area. She settled in beside us, her tail wrapping around us both, and we sat in comfortable silence, a family born from impossible circumstances and made real by choice. The Institute continued to grow, becoming known throughout the sector as the premier training ground for navigators and engineers. We had students who went on to join the Concordate fleet, others who started their own transport businesses, some who became explorers mapping the unknown regions. Each one carried with them the lessons we'd taught, not just about flying ships, but about building bridges. Lysandra's family flourished too. The settlement became a thriving town, then a small city. Marriages happened, children were born. Life continued in all its messy, beautiful complexity. And at the center of it all was the truth we'd proven, that family wasn't just about blood or species, but about choice and love and standing together when it mattered. I'm an old man now, my hair more grey than brown, my hands not as steady as they once were. Lysandra's fur has silvered too, though she moves with the same grace that first captured my heart. Nova has children of her own, continuing the legacy we started, building new bridges we couldn't have imagined. Sometimes I think about that younger version of myself, sitting in a bar, nursing his 3rd drink, planning on minding his own business. I want to tell him to stand up, to be brave, to reach out for the impossible, because sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible reaches back, but he wouldn't listen. He'd have to learn it himself the way we all do, through taking that first terrifying step into the unknown. Lysandra and I still take walks through the forest in the evenings, moving slower now, but no less together. Her tail wraps around my wrist the way it has for 30 years, a gesture that still fills me with warmth. We talk about our students, our grandchildren, the ships that come and go from the spaceport we built together, and sometimes when the twin suns set in that particular way that turns the sky to amber and gold, I think about how differently my life could have gone. How one choice in one moment changed everything. How reaching out when I didn't have to led me to love, to family, to home, to purpose. No one ever touched my tail. Lysandra said to me once, in those early days when we were still learning each other. You were the first, the only one I trusted enough to let in. I'm honored, I told her then, and I've told her 1,000 times since. But the truth is, I'm the one who was saved that day. She thought I was rescuing her, but really, we rescued each other. From loneliness, from purposelessness, from the kind of life that's just existence without meaning. The stars still sing their ancient songs above us. The universe still holds mysteries we haven't solved. But here, in this forest, on this world, surrounded by the family we built from nothing but choice and courage and love, I've found everything I was looking for without knowing I was looking. And it all started because I saw someone who needed help and decided to be the kind of man who stands up. The kind who reaches out gently, even when he's scared. The kind who believes that sometimes the impossible becomes real if you're just brave enough to try. That's the story I'll leave behind, written not in words, but in the lives we've touched, the students we've taught, the family we've built. A cargo hauler and a navigator, a human and a Kashari, two souls who found each other in the vastness of space and chose to build something that mattered. No one ever touched my tail, she said, and I reached out gently, not knowing that in that moment I was reaching for my entire future. That's all any of us can do, really. Reach out, be gentle, be brave, and trust that sometimes love and purpose find us in the most unexpected places. This is Colt Brennan, signing off. May your jumps be smooth, your ships fly true, and your hearts be brave enough to reach for the impossible.